She left you everything? Jonathan's laugh cut like broken glass. Evie held the deed to the Beaumont Grand, $500 million in Charleston history, and watched her husband's face transform into something she had never seen in 14 years of marriage. The man she had loved, the man she had built a life with, the man she had trusted with her heart and her future, looked at her now with undisguised contempt. His mother stepped forward, diamonds glinting at her throat and hatred glinting in her pale blue eyes. My son's name will be on that hotel by month's end. 14 years of marriage dissolved in that moment. They didn't want her. They wanted what belonged to her. The attorney's office on Broad Street smelled of old money and older secrets. Evie sat in a leather chair that probably cost more than her first car, surrounded by oil paintings of dead white men who had built Charleston on the backs of people who looked like her. The irony wasn't lost on her. It never was. Eleanor Ashworth's attorney, a silver-haired gentleman named Preston Carmichael, cleared his throat and adjusted his spectacles. Mrs. Mitchell, I understand this comes as a surprise to you. A surprise? Jonathan's voice dripped with something that sounded almost like amusement but felt like acid. My wife just inherited a $500 million hotel from a woman who was clearly not in her right mind. And you call that a surprise? Evie's fingers tightened on the documents in her lap, the deed, the trust paperwork, Eleanor's final letter, still sealed in its cream-colored envelope. She hadn't opened it yet. Couldn't open it yet, not in front of them. Mr. Mitchell. Preston's voice carried the quiet authority of a man who had dealt with entitled Charleston families for 40 years. Mrs. Ashworth was examined by 3 independent physicians in the months before her passing. All 3 confirmed she was of sound mind and clear judgment. This bequest was not made impulsively. She updated her will 18 months ago with the explicit intention of leaving the Beaumont Grand to your wife. 18 months? Constance Mitchell's voice sliced through the room like a blade wrapped in silk. She sat perfectly straight in her chair, her vintage Chanel suit immaculate, her pearl necklace catching the light. At 78 years old, she still commanded every room she entered. You're telling me that woman planned this for 18 months and never thought to inform the family? Mrs. Ashworth was a private woman, Mrs. Mitchell. She shared her decisions with those she deemed appropriate. And apparently that didn't include her own social circle. Constance's lips pressed into a thin line. Eleanor and I served on the Charleston Preservation Society together for 30 years, and she left her family's legacy to... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Evie knew exactly what word Constance Mitchell had swallowed. She had been swallowing that word for 14 years, hiding it behind backhanded compliments and concerned observations about Evie's hair, her clothes, her background. Always so articulate, Constance would say. You'd never know she started as a front desk clerk. The bequest is ironclad. Preston's voice remained steady. Mrs. Ashworth structured the inheritance as a living trust with Mrs. Mitchell as the sole beneficiary. The hotel, the property, all associated assets, they belong to Evangeline Price Mitchell, free and clear. Evie finally looked up. Price Mitchell? Preston nodded, something soft flickering in his eyes. Mrs. Ashworth was specific. She wanted your maiden name included in all documentation. She said, he paused, consulting his notes. She said you were a Price before you were anything else, and you should never forget the woman who raised you. Evie's mother, Dolores Price, 35 years of pressing sheets and turning down beds at the Beaumont Grand, 35 years of coming home with aching feet and tired eyes and still making sure her daughter had everything she needed. Dolores had died 8 years ago, in a hospital bed that Eleanor Ashworth had paid for, surrounded by flowers that Eleanor had sent. Eleanor never forgot the people who made her hotel a home, and now, even in death, she was making sure her favorite daughter, her chosen daughter, would never forget either. This is unacceptable. Jonathan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I want to see the original documents. I want independent verification of these so-called physician reports. And I want a full accounting of my wife's relationship with Mrs. Ashworth, because this, he gestured at the papers in Evie's hands. This doesn't happen without some kind of undue influence. Evie's head snapped up. Undue influence? What would you call it? Jonathan's handsome face twisted into something ugly. You spent 25 years working for that woman, hovering around her, making yourself indispensable. And now, suddenly, you inherit everything? How does that look, Evangeline? Evangeline. He never called her Evangeline unless he was angry. For 14 years, she had been Evie, his Evie. The woman he had swept off her feet at a hotel industry conference, the woman he had pursued with flowers and promises, and that devastating smile. The woman he had married in a garden ceremony with 200 guests and a string quartet playing her father's favorite jazz standards. Now she was Evangeline, a stranger, a suspect. It looks like a woman who loved me decided to leave me her legacy. Evie's voice came out steadier than she expected. It looks like Eleanor Ashworth knew exactly what she was doing. Eleanor Ashworth was 86 years old and living alone in that crumbling mansion of hers. Anyone could have manipulated her. Anyone could have whispered in her ear about what a wonderful person Evangeline was, how deserving, how... Jonathan. Evie stood slowly, her full height putting her nearly eye to eye with her husband. Eleanor Ashworth was the sharpest person I've ever known. She ran that hotel for 60 years and made it one of the most prestigious properties in the South. She wasn't manipulated by anyone, least of all me. Then explain this. Jonathan snatched the deed from her hands, waving it like evidence of a crime. Explain why a woman with no children, no direct heirs, would leave a $500 million property to her hotel manager instead of establishing a foundation or donating to charity or doing literally anything else that makes sense. Because she loved me, Evie thought. Because I was the daughter she never had. Because for 25 years, I was the one who sat with her when she was lonely, who celebrated her birthdays, who held her hand when she cried about the husband she lost 40 years ago. But she didn't say any of that. Jonathan wouldn't understand. Jonathan had never understood what it meant to build a family out of choice instead of blood. I think, Preston Carmichael said quietly, that perhaps this conversation should continue at another time. Mrs. Mitchell, you are welcome to have your own counsel review the documents. The originals will remain in this office, but I can provide certified copies of everything. You'll be hearing from our attorney. Constance rose from her chair with the practiced grace of a woman who had spent her entire life being watched. Harrison Blackwell has represented the Mitchell family for 3 generations. He'll know exactly how to handle this situation. She said situation the same way she might say infection. Preston Carmichael's expression didn't change. Mr. Blackwell is welcome to contact my office at his convenience. However, I should inform you that Mrs. Ashworth anticipated potential challenges to her wishes. She took extensive precautions to ensure her bequest would be honored. We'll see about that. Constance gathered her handbag. Hermes, vintage, probably worth more than most people's cars. Jonathan, we're leaving. Jonathan hesitated, looking at Evie with something that might have been confusion or might have been calculation. Evie. Go with your mother, Jonathan. Evie's voice was quiet. I have some things to discuss with Mr. Carmichael, alone. For a moment, something flickered across Jonathan's face, hurt, perhaps, or anger at being dismissed. Then his expression hardened, and he followed his mother out of the office without another word. The door clicked shut behind them. Evie sank back into her chair, suddenly exhausted. The documents felt heavy in her hands, weighted with responsibility and grief, and something that felt almost like fear. Mrs. Mitchell. Preston Carmichael leaned forward, his voice gentle. Are you all right? I don't know. Evie pressed her fingers to her temples. I honestly don't know. Mrs. Ashworth left something else for you, something she asked me to give you only when you were alone. He reached into his desk drawer and withdrew a small velvet box, along with a second envelope, this one pale blue, with Evie's name written across the front in Eleanor's distinctive, elegant script. Evie recognized the box. She had seen it on Eleanor's vanity 100 times, had watched Eleanor touch it with reverent fingers whenever they spoke about the past. Her mother's ring, Evie whispered. She wanted you to have it, along with this letter. Preston placed both items on the desk between them. She also left a video message to be played in the event of any legal challenge to her will. I have a copy secured in this office and 2 additional copies in separate locations. Mrs. Ashworth was, as you said, an exceptionally sharp woman. Evie reached for the velvet box first, her fingers trembling. Inside, nestled against cream-colored silk, was a sapphire ring surrounded by small diamonds. It had belonged to Eleanor's mother, and her mother before that, 4 generations of Ashworth women who had worn this ring on their right hand as a symbol of strength and independence. Eleanor had never had a daughter to pass it to. Until now. Evie slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. She had it sized, Preston said quietly. 6 months ago. She said she wanted to make sure it would fit you when the time came. The tears Evie had been holding back finally spilled over. She clutched the blue envelope to her chest, unable to open it, unable to do anything but cry for the woman who had loved her like a mother and trusted her with everything she had built. "Take your time, Mrs. Mitchell." Preston Carmichael rose and moved toward the door. "I'll give you privacy. But please, read that letter. Mrs. Ashworth worked on it for months. She wanted you to understand exactly why she made this choice." He left her alone with Eleanor's final words. Evie opened the envelope with trembling fingers. "My dearest Evie," the letter began. "If you're reading this, then I've finally gone to join my William, and you're probably sitting in Preston's office, surrounded by people who are very unhappy with me right now. I'm sorry for the chaos, my darling, but I'm not sorry for my choice. You are the daughter I never had. Not because I couldn't have children. I could have, once. But because I never found anyone I wanted to raise them with after William died. And then you came into my life, this fierce, brilliant girl with your mother's eyes and your father's spirit. And I realized that daughters don't have to share your blood. They just have to share your heart. I'm leaving you the hotel because there is no one else on this earth I trust to protect it. The Beaumont Grand isn't just a building, Evie. It's 150 years of history. It's the story of Charleston itself, the good and the terrible, the progress and the pain. It's the place where your mother worked her whole life, where your father proposed to her in the Ado garden, where you took your first steps and learned to read and grew into the magnificent woman you are today. It's your home. It's always been your home. I'm just making it official. I know what you're facing. I know Jonathan and his mother will fight this with everything they have. They see you as an obstacle between them and a fortune they believe they deserve. But here's what they don't understand, my darling. You are not an obstacle. You are a fortress. You are the strongest person I've ever known, and that strength doesn't come from money or position. It comes from surviving things that would have destroyed lesser women. Your father's death when you were just a child. Working your way through school while your mother worked herself to exhaustion. Clawing your way up in an industry that didn't want to make room for you. You did all of that, Evie. You built yourself from nothing, and no one, not Jonathan, not Constance, not any judge in Charleston, can take that from you. There's a man I want you to meet. His name is Conrad Reeves, and he's been my attorney for the last 15 years. He grew up in foster care, just like so many of the children your mother used to help through the hotel's charity programs. He made himself into something remarkable, and he's one of the few men I've ever trusted completely. If you're in trouble, and I suspect you will be, given the vultures circling, go to Conrad. He knows everything. He has copies of every document, every piece of evidence, every safeguard I put in place to protect you. He promised me he would watch over you, and Conrad Reeves keeps his promises. One more thing, my darling. I know you love Jonathan. Or at least, I know you've convinced yourself that you do. But love isn't supposed to make you smaller. It isn't supposed to require you to hide the brightest parts of yourself so someone else can feel like the sun. You deserve to be loved by someone who sees your light and wants to stand in it, not someone who needs to dim it so he doesn't feel outshone. Find that love, Evie. Whether it's with a partner or with yourself, find it. You've spent too many years making yourself fit into someone else's story. It's time to write your own. I love you, my darling girl. I'm so proud of everything you are and everything you will become. Take care of my hotel. Take care of yourself. And remember, you are a price before you are anything else. All my love forever. Eleanor Evie read the letter 3 times. Then she folded it carefully, slipped it back into its envelope, and placed it in her purse alongside her mother's watch and her father's wedding band. Eleanor was right about one thing. The vultures were circling. But Evie had been underestimated her entire life. It was time to show them exactly who they were dealing with. The drive home took 45 minutes. Jonathan didn't speak a single word the entire time. Evie sat in the passenger seat of his Mercedes, watching the Spanish moss drift past, like ghostly fingers reaching for something they couldn't quite touch. Charleston in October was beautiful in that haunted way the South always managed. Golden afternoon light filtering through ancient oaks, historic houses gleaming in colors that had names like Dusty Rose and Charleston Green, tourists wandering the sidewalks with cameras and sweet tea and no idea how much history they were walking on. She loved this city, had loved it her entire life. But right now, sitting next to a husband who looked at her like a stranger, worse, like an enemy, she wondered if she had ever really known it at all. They pulled into the driveway of their home in the historic district, a gorgeous townhouse that Jonathan had inherited from his grandmother. When they married, Evie had thought living there was romantic, a piece of Mitchell family history that she got to be part of. Now she understood the truth. She'd never been part of the Mitchell family. She had been an addition, an accessory, a capable, well-spoken accessory who could manage their social calendar and make them look progressive without ever actually threatening their position. Jonathan killed the engine but didn't move to get out. His hand stayed on the steering wheel, knuckles white. "We need to talk about this," he said finally. "Without my mother, just you and me." "All right." Evie turned to face him. "Talk." "I don't understand how this happened." Jonathan's voice was strained, like he was holding back something that wanted to explode. 25 years you worked for that woman. 25 years, and you never once mentioned that she was planning to leave you everything. "Because I didn't know, Jonathan." Evie kept her voice calm, even though her heart was pounding. "Eleanor never told me about the will. I had no idea until today." "That's convenient." The word hit her like a slap. "Convenient?" Evie repeated. "You think I orchestrated this? You think I somehow manipulated an 86-year-old woman into leaving me her entire estate?" "I think—" Jonathan finally turned to look at her, and what Evie saw in his eyes made her stomach drop. "I think you've always been ambitious. I think you've always wanted more than you were willing to admit. And I think Eleanor Ashworth was vulnerable, and you took advantage of that vulnerability." Evie stared at him. This man she had slept beside for 14 years, this man whose children she had wanted, whose future she had planned, whose happiness she had put before her own more times than she could count. He didn't know her at all. "I'm going to ask you something," she said quietly, "and I want you to think very carefully before you answer." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "What?" "If Eleanor had left that hotel to you instead of me, would you be questioning her mental state? Would you be suggesting she was manipulated? Or would you be accepting your good fortune and moving on with your life?" Silence. The answer was written all over his face, but Evie needed to hear him say it, needed to know, once and for all, exactly where she stood in her own marriage. "That's different," Jonathan said finally. How?" "Because I—" He stopped himself, but too late. The words were already hanging in the air between them, heavy and poisonous. "Because I deserve it," that's what he was going to say. Because he was a Mitchell, born into Charleston society, raised with the expectation that good things would simply come to him. And she was Evie Price, daughter of a housekeeper and a jazz musician, someone who had clawed her way up from nothing and should be grateful for whatever scraps fell from the table. "I see." Evie's voice came out flat, distant, like she was watching this conversation from very far away. "Thank you for clarifying." "Evie, that's not what I think I'm going to stay in the guest room tonight." She unbuckled her seatbelt and reached for the door handle. "We can talk more tomorrow when we've both had time to process." "Evie," Jonathan grabbed her wrist, his grip too tight. "You can't just walk away from this conversation." She looked down at his hand on her arm, looked up at his face, and for the first time in 14 years, she didn't see the man she married. She saw a stranger. "Let go of me, Jonathan." Something in her voice made him release her immediately. He looked almost surprised at himself, like he hadn't realized what he was doing. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to. Good night, Jonathan." She got out of the car and walked into the house without looking back. The guest room was at the end of the hallway, past the master bedroom they had shared for over a decade. It was decorated in Mitchell family style, Antique furniture, faded floral wallpaper, portraits of long-dead relatives staring disapprovingly from gilded frames. Evie had never felt comfortable in this room, had never felt comfortable in this house, if she was being honest. But tonight, for the first time, she was grateful for its existence. She locked the door behind her, sat down on the edge of the bed, and finally allowed herself to fall apart. The tears came in waves, grief for Eleanor, confusion about Jonathan, fear about what came next. She clutched her father's wedding band through the fabric of her blouse, the familiar weight of it grounding her when everything else felt like it was spinning out of control. Reginald Price had died when Evie was 12 years old. Heart attack, the doctor said, sudden and swift, like God had decided to take him home in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. She remembered coming home from school and finding her mother on the kitchen floor, sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe. Her father had been a jazz musician, not famous, not wealthy, but loved. He played piano at hotels and restaurants all over Charleston, filling rooms with music that made people want to dance and cry and fall in love all at once. He had proposed to her mother in the garden at the Beaumont Grand during a break between sets at a wedding reception. He had named Evie after Evangeline, the heroine of a poem he loved, a woman who spent her life searching for her lost love and finally found him only at the end. Sometimes Evie wondered if her father had known something, even then, if he had sensed that his daughter would spend years searching for things she didn't know she was missing. Love, belonging, a place in the world that was truly hers. Maybe Eleanor had understood that. Maybe that's why she left Evie the hotel, not as a gift, but as a homecoming. Evie pulled out Eleanor's letter and read it again. Then she pulled out her phone and searched for a name. Conrad Reeves. He had a website, a simple professional page with his credentials and contact information. Harvard Law, 15 years in hospitality and property law, a reputation for integrity in an industry not always known for it. There was a photo, too. A man in his early 50s with salt and pepper hair and warm hazel eyes, the kind of face that looked like it had seen things and decided to be kind anyway. Eleanor had trusted him. That was enough for Evie. She composed an email, her fingers trembling only slightly as she typed. Mr. Reeves, my name is Evangeline Price Mitchell. Eleanor Ashworth was my mentor and friend, and apparently she was also your client. I received her bequest today, along with instructions to contact you if I needed help. I need help. My husband and mother-in-law are planning to contest the will. I don't know what I'm facing, but I know I can't face it alone. Eleanor said you keep your promises. I'm counting on that being true. Please call me at your earliest convenience. Sincerely, Evie. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. Then she lay back on the guest bed, staring at the ceiling, and waited for the world to fall apart. If you're loving Evie's story so far, make sure you're subscribed and have that notification bell turned on so you don't miss what happens next. And drop a heart in the comments if you think Jonathan Mitchell is about to learn exactly who he married. Now, let's continue. The phone call came at 6 o'clock the next morning. Evie had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Jonathan's face in the attorney's office, twisted with contempt. She saw Constance's thin smile, predatory and cold. She heard Eleanor's voice from the letter, telling her she was strong, telling her to fight. By the time her phone rang, she had already been awake for 2 hours, sitting in the guest room with a cup of cold coffee and a growing sense of dread. The number was local, Charleston area code. Hello. Mrs. Mitchell, this is Conrad Reeves. His voice was warm but professional, the kind of voice that put you at ease without making you feel coddled. I received your email last night. I'm sorry I couldn't respond immediately. I was on a flight back from Boston. You came back to Charleston? Eleanor asked me to. There was something heavy in his voice, something that spoke of grief still raw. She called me 2 weeks before she died, told me everything was in place and that I should be ready. I didn't want to believe her, but he paused. She was always right about these things. Evie closed her eyes. She knew she was dying. She was at peace with it. That's what she wanted me to tell you if you asked. She was ready. I didn't get to say goodbye. The words came out before Evie could stop them. I saw her 3 days before she passed, and she seemed fine. Tired, but fine. We had tea in her sitting room and talked about the hotel's winter renovations. and she held my hand and told me she loved me, and I didn't know. I didn't realize. She knew, Conrad said gently. She knew that was goodbye. She just didn't want to make you carry that weight. Evie pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting back a sob. I'm sorry. Conrad's voice softened further. I know this isn't easy, but I need to see you today, if possible. There are things you need to know before your husband's attorney starts making moves. What kind of things? The kind of things Eleanor prepared for. She spent the last 18 months building a fortress around that inheritance. Every possible angle of attack, every legal loophole, every way someone might try to take what she gave you. She thought of it, and she closed it off. Then why am I worried? Because the people trying to take it from you don't care about what's legal. They care about what they can get away with, and in Charleston, those aren't always the same thing. Evie thought about Constance Mitchell's connections, 30 years on the Preservation Society, friendships with judges and politicians and police chiefs, a family name that opened doors Evie had never even known existed. Where should we meet? The hotel, Eleanor's private study. I have keys and I have documents she wanted you to see. He paused. Can you get away without your husband asking questions? Evie looked at the locked guest room door. She hadn't heard Jonathan stirring yet. If she left now, she could be gone before he woke up. I can be there in an hour. I'll be waiting. The Beaumont Grand Hotel rose against the Charleston sky like a dream made solid. Evie had seen it 1,000 times, 10,000 times, but today it looked different. Today it looked like hers. The building was magnificent. 5 stories of antebellum architecture, white columns and wrought iron balconies. A sweeping entrance that had welcomed presidents and movie stars and ordinary people looking for something beautiful. Eleanor's grandfather had built it in 1872, and every generation of Ashworths had poured their hearts into keeping it standing. Now it belonged to Evie. She parked in her usual spot, the general manager's space, which she supposed was still accurate even if her title had changed overnight, and walked through the employee entrance with her head high. The morning staff nodded at her as she passed. Rosa from housekeeping, Marcus from the kitchen, 17-year-old Jalen who worked the breakfast shift before his community college classes. They didn't know yet. The news hadn't spread, but it would. By the end of the day, everyone in Charleston would know that Evie Price Mitchell had inherited the most prestigious hotel in the city, and everyone would have an opinion about whether she deserved it. Eleanor's private study was on the 5th floor, tucked away in a corner of the historic wing that most guests never saw. Evie had spent countless hours in that room over the years, sitting in the leather armchair by the window, while Eleanor told stories about the hotel's history, about her late husband William, about the daughter she almost had, and the life she almost lived. The door was already open when Evie arrived. Inside, a man stood by the window with his back to her, silhouetted against the morning light. He turned at the sound of her footsteps. Conrad Reeves looked older in person than he had in his website photo. There were lines around his eyes that the camera hadn't captured, and his hair was more silver than salt and pepper. But his eyes were exactly what Evie had expected, warm, intelligent, and carrying a weight of sadness that she recognized immediately. This was a man who understood grief, who had lived through it and come out the other side without losing his kindness. Mrs. Mitchell, he extended his hand. It's an honor to finally meet you. Eleanor talked about you constantly. Evie took his hand. His grip was firm but gentle. Please, call me Evie. Evie. He nodded, gesturing to the chair across from him. Make yourself comfortable. We have a lot to discuss. Evie sat down, taking in the familiar surroundings with new eyes. The walls were lined with bookshelves, every inch packed with volumes on Charleston history, hotel management, and Eleanor's secret passion, mystery novels. Her reading glasses still sat on the side table, as if she had just stepped away for a moment and would be right back. I keep expecting her to walk through that door, Evie admitted. Every time I come up here, some part of me still thinks she'll be sitting in that chair, complaining about her hip and asking if I have eaten lunch. Conrad smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. She worried about you constantly. She used to call me and say, Conrad, that girl works too hard. She's going to run herself into the ground, and then where will we be? That sounds like her. She loved you like a daughter. Conrad's voice was quiet. I hope you know that. I do now. Evie touched the sapphire ring on her right hand, Eleanor's mother's ring, now hers. I don't think I understood before. I thought she was just being kind, but this... She gestured around the room, at the hotel beyond the walls, at everything Eleanor had left her. This is more than kindness. It's trust, Conrad said, the most valuable thing. Eleanor Ashworth had to give, and she gave it all to you. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. Which brings us to business. I need to show you what we're dealing with. He spread documents across the desk between them, deeds and trust paperwork, and what looked like pages and pages of legal correspondence. Eleanor started planning this 18 months ago, right after her doctor gave her the final prognosis. She knew she had limited time, and she knew exactly what would happen when she was gone. He tapped one of the documents. This is the original trust agreement. Your husband's name appears nowhere in it. Neither does your mother-in-law's. Jonathan is going to contest it, Evie said. He's already talking about undue influence. I expected that. Conrad's expression didn't change. Which is why Eleanor had herself examined by 3 independent physicians, all of whom documented her mental competence in detail. She also recorded video testimony explaining her decision, complete with specific reasons why she chose you and why she excluded any potential family claims. She thought of everything. She tried to. Conrad paused. But there's something you need to understand, Evie. This isn't just about the law. Your husband's family has deep roots in Charleston. They have connections, favors to call in, people who will look the other way if the right pressure is applied. I know Constance. I've been married to her son for 14 years. Then you know she won't fight fair. Conrad met her eyes. Neither will your husband. The words hit Evie like a punch. Not because they surprised her. After yesterday, nothing Jonathan did would surprise her, but because hearing them spoken aloud made them real. How bad is it? She asked. I did some digging after I got your email. Made some calls to contacts in the financial sector. Conrad's jaw tightened. Your husband has been siphoning money from your joint accounts for years, small amounts at first, a few thousand here, a few thousand there. But it's escalated significantly in the last 18 months. By my estimate, he's taken close to $400,000. Evie felt the blood drain from her face. 400,000? And that's not the worst of it. Conrad pulled out another document. He has gambling debts, substantial ones, the kind that don't get forgiven easily if you understand my meaning. How substantial? 800,000, maybe more. Evie stared at him. That's more than $1 million, combined. Yes. And he's been hiding this from me for how long? At least 3 years, based on the records I've been able to access. Possibly longer. Evie stood abruptly, moving to the window because she couldn't sit still any longer. The city stretched out below her, beautiful and treacherous, a place where secrets lived in the spaces between historic buildings and family names could protect you from almost anything. Almost anything. He knew, she said quietly. When Eleanor's will was read, that reaction wasn't shock. It wasn't even greed. It was desperation. $500 million would solve all his problems overnight. Conrad's voice was gentle, but the words were brutal. Pay off his debts, restore his family's status, fund whatever lifestyle he wants to live. All he has to do is take it from you. Evie turned to face him. Can he? No. Conrad's answer was immediate and certain. Eleanor made sure of that. The trust is ironclad. Even if your husband successfully contests the will, which he won't, the most he could claim would be a spousal share of any assets considered marital property. The hotel isn't marital property. It was bequeathed to you specifically, and Eleanor structured it to exist completely outside your marriage. So I'm safe. Legally, yes. Conrad paused. But this isn't just about the law, Evie. Your husband is desperate, and desperate people do desperate things. You need to protect yourself in ways that go beyond courtroom strategy. Evie thought about Jonathan's hand on her wrist in the car, the way his grip had tightened before he caught himself, the look in his eyes when he realized she wasn't going to back down. What do you suggest? Conrad stood, moving to join her by the window. He was taller than she expected, broad-shouldered in a way that suggested strength kept carefully controlled. This close, she could see the small scar above his left eyebrow, a thin white line that told a story she didn't yet know. "Document everything," he said. "Every conversation, every interaction, every financial transaction. If your husband makes threats, record them. If his mother starts making calls to her society friends, keep track of who she contacts and what she says. You want me to spy on my own husband. I want you to survive." Conrad's eyes met hers, and for a moment, Evie saw something there that went beyond professional concern. "Eleanor trusted me to protect you. I don't take that lightly." "Why?" The question came out before she could stop it. "Why did Eleanor trust you so much? Why do you care what happens to me?" Conrad was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different, softer, more personal. "Because she saved my life." Evie waited. "I grew up in foster care," Conrad said. "Aged out of the system at 18 with no money, no family, no prospects. I worked my way through college and law school on scholarships and loans, and by the time I finished, I was drowning in debt." He turned to look out the window, his profile sharp against the morning light. "I applied for a job at Eleanor's hotel. Night security, nothing fancy. She hired me on the spot, but she didn't stop there. She found out I was living in my car, and she gave me a room. Found out I was studying for the bar, and she hired tutors. Found out I wanted to specialize in hospitality law, and she introduced me to every major player in the industry." Conrad's voice cracked slightly. "She was the first person in my life who believed I could be something more than my circumstances. The first person who saw potential instead of problems." Evie touched his arm without thinking about it, a gesture of comfort, of shared understanding. "She saw the same thing in you," Conrad said, turning to face her. "That's why she left you everything. Not because you worked for her, not because you were convenient, but because you were the person she wanted carrying her legacy forward." They stood there in Eleanor's study, surrounded by books and memories and the weight of a trust neither of them had asked for, but both of them were determined to honor. "I'm scared," Evie admitted. "I'm not supposed to say that. I'm supposed to be strong and capable and ready to fight. But I'm scared. My marriage is falling apart. My husband apparently wants to steal everything I have, and I just inherited a $500 million hotel that I don't know if I deserve." "You deserve it." Conrad's voice was firm. "Eleanor didn't make mistakes. If she chose you, it's because you're the right person for this." "How do you know?" "Because I've spent 15 years watching her watch you." A small smile tugged at his mouth. "Every time I visited, every phone call, every meeting, you were the topic. Evie did this today. Evie solved that problem. Evie is going to change the world. Just you wait." Evie felt tears threatening again and blinked them back. "She never told me any of that." "She didn't need to. She showed you instead." Conrad gestured around the room at the hotel beyond. "This is how Eleanor Ashworth said I love you. This is how she said I believe in you." For a moment they just stood there, two people bound together by a woman who wasn't there anymore, carrying forward a legacy neither of them had asked for, but both of them were determined to protect. Then Conrad's phone buzzed, breaking the spell. He glanced at the screen, and his expression shifted, warmer, more private. "My daughter," he said. "I should take this. She worries." "Of course." He stepped away to answer, and Evie heard fragments of the conversation. "I'm fine, sweetheart." "Yes, I made it safely. I'll tell you about it when I see you. A man who loved his daughter, a man who had built himself from nothing, a man Eleanor had trusted with everything." Maybe, Evie thought, she could trust him too. If you want to see Evie take on Jonathan and Constance, and if you're as invested in her story as I am, make sure you're subscribed and have that notification bell on. Drop a comment and tell me, do you think Jonathan ever really loved Evie? Or was she always just a means to an end? Chapter 2. 3 days after the will reading, Evie stood in the lobby of her hotel and watched her husband try to steal it. Jonathan had arrived with Constance and a man Evie didn't recognize. Tall, silver-haired, dressed in the kind of suit that cost more than some people's cars. Harrison, Blackwell, she assumed, the Mitchell family attorney, the man Constance had promised would handle this situation. Timothy Holbrook intercepted them at the front desk, his broad shoulders blocking their path forward. Evie's CFO was a formidable presence, 6'3", built like a former linebacker, with a calm demeanor that could shift to intimidating steel in an instant. "I'm sorry, Mr. Mitchell," Timothy said, his voice carrying across the marble lobby. "I can't authorize that request without Mrs. Mitchell's approval." "I am Mrs. Mitchell's husband." Jonathan's voice was loud enough to draw attention from the guests checking in nearby. "I have every right to access the financial records of an asset that belongs to my family." "The hotel belongs to Mrs. Price Mitchell," Timothy corrected him, "and the records you're requesting are confidential. If you'd like to discuss this further, I suggest you make an appointment." "An appointment?" Constance's laugh was brittle. "To access our own property?" "It's not your property, Mrs. Mitchell." Evie stepped forward, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She had dressed for battle today, a tailored navy suit, her mother's watch, Eleanor's sapphire ring. "It belongs to me." Jonathan turned to face her. He looked tired, Evie noticed, dark circles under his eyes, lines around his mouth that hadn't been there a week ago. Whatever was going on with his gambling debts, it was taking a toll. "Good." "Evie," Jonathan's smile was strained. "We were just trying to review some paperwork. Standard due diligence, nothing unusual." "There's nothing standard about showing up at my hotel with your attorney and demanding access to confidential records." Evie kept her voice calm, professional, the same voice she used when dealing with difficult guests. "If you have legal concerns about the inheritance, you're welcome to file them through the proper channels." "That's exactly what we intend to do." Harrison Blackwell stepped forward, his smile as slick as his Italian shoes. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm Harrison Blackwell. I represent your husband and mother-in-law in this matter." "I know who you are." "Then you know that we have significant concerns about the validity of Eleanor Ashworth's bequest." Blackwell pulled a document from his briefcase. "We've filed a formal challenge with the probate court, citing questions about Mrs. Ashworth's mental competence at the time the will was executed." Evie took the document without reading it. "I look forward to addressing your concerns in court." "Mrs. Mitchell." Blackwell's voice dropped to something more confidential, more dangerous. "I've been practicing law in Charleston for 30 years. I've seen cases like this before. They can get very ugly, very expensive, and very public. The kind of publicity that isn't good for anyone, including the hotel you're supposedly trying to protect." "Is that a threat, Mr. Blackwell?" "It's a reality check." He smiled. "We're prepared to offer a settlement. Your husband is willing to accept 40% of the hotel's value in exchange for dropping the challenge. You'd maintain operational control, and everyone walks away without a prolonged legal battle. 40% of $500 million. $200 million, just to make Jonathan and Constance go away." It was tempting. Evie couldn't deny that. $200 million was more money than she would ever need, and it would end this nightmare before it really began. But it wasn't about the money. It was about Eleanor. It was about trust. It was about standing her ground in a world that had always expected her to step aside. "No." The word came out clear and final. Blackwell's smile faltered. "I'm sorry." "I said no." Evie met Jonathan's eyes over his attorney's shoulder. "Eleanor left this hotel to me. Not to my husband, not to my mother-in-law, not to anyone else. She made her wishes clear, and I'm going to honor them." "Evie, think about this." Jonathan stepped toward her, his voice softening into something that might have sounded like concern if she didn't know better. "We've been married for 14 years. Whatever problems we're having right now, we can work through them. But this, fighting over money like strangers, that's not us." "You're right, it's not us." Evie held his gaze. "But the man I married wouldn't have called me a manipulator the day his mentor died. The man I married wouldn't have threatened to take everything I have the moment he found out I had something worth taking." Jonathan flinched. "Mrs. Mitchell," Blackwell tried again, "this conversation is over." Evie turned to Timothy. "Please escort these visitors out. If they return without an appointment, call security." "Yes, ma'am." Constance Mitchell's face had gone pale with fury. "You're making a mistake, a very serious mistake." "Maybe." Evie met her mother-in-law's eyes, those cold blue eyes that had judged her for 14 years, that had looked at her like something unpleasant stuck to the bottom of a shoe. "But it's my mistake to make." She turned and walked away without looking back. Her hands didn't start shaking until she was safely inside the elevator. That was impressive. Evie spun around. Conrad Reeves was standing in the corner of the elevator, a coffee cup in each hand, and an expression of bemused admiration on his face. "Were you there the whole time?" "I came in through the employee entrance, wanted to bring you coffee." He held out one of the cups. "I saw the confrontation happening and decided to wait. Didn't want to interfere with what was clearly your moment." Evie took the coffee with trembling fingers. "I just told my husband and his attorney to go to hell." "You told them to go through proper legal channels, much more civilized." Conrad smiled. "Also much more devastating, legally speaking." The elevator doors opened on the 5th floor, and they walked together toward Eleanor's study. Evie had been spending most of her time here lately, partly because it was a refuge from the chaos below, and partly because being surrounded by Eleanor's things made her feel less alone. "They offered $200 million to settle," Evie said as they entered the study. "I heard." Conrad closed the door behind them. "Were you tempted?" "For about 3 seconds." "What stopped you?" Evie sat down in her usual chair, wrapping her hands around the warm coffee cup. "Eleanor, she left me this hotel because she trusted me to protect it. Taking a settlement would feel like selling her trust, like proving that I never deserved it in the first place." Conrad sat across from her, his expression serious. "You realize this means they're going to fight dirty. That offer was their opening move, the reasonable option before things get ugly. When you turned it down, you declared war." "I know. And you're okay with that?" Evie thought about Jonathan's face in the lobby, the desperation beneath his anger, the way Constance had looked at her with such pure hatred. "I've been fighting my whole life," she said quietly. "Fighting to be seen, fighting to be taken seriously, fighting to prove that I belong in rooms where people like me weren't supposed to be." She looked up at Conrad. "I'm tired of fighting, but I'm more tired of giving up." Something shifted in Conrad's expression. The professional distance softened into something more personal, more invested. "Eleanor was right about you," he said. "What did she say?" "That you were the strongest person she'd ever met." Conrad leaned forward. "She said most people build walls to protect themselves, but you built yourself into a wall. Unbreakable. Unmovable." Evie felt tears threatening again and blinked them back. "I don't feel unbreakable. Nobody does when they are in the middle of it." Conrad's voice was gentle. "That's what makes it real strength instead of an act." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping coffee and watching the afternoon light shift across the walls. Eleanor's presence felt strong in this room. Her books, her photographs, the faint scent of her perfume still clinging to the curtains. "Tell me about your daughter," Evie said. "Clara, right?" Conrad's face softened. "She's a museum curator, African-American art history, specializing in the Charleston and Low Country region." "She sounds brilliant." "She is, also stubborn, opinionated, and completely certain that she knows better than her father about everything." He smiled, which she usually does, to be fair. "Does she live in Charleston?" "Moved back last year. She was in New York for a while, but she said the South kept calling her home." His expression grew more thoughtful. "She's actually been researching the hotel's history. The Beaumont Grand has a complicated past, like most places in Charleston, and Clara's been digging into the stories that got buried over the years." Evie straightened in her chair. "What kind of stories?" "Black workers, who kept this place running through every crisis in its history. Eleanor started a project a few years ago to document their contributions. Your mother's among them. Clara's been continuing it." Evie's heart clenched. Her mother, Dolores Price, who had pressed sheets and turned down beds until her back ached and her feet swelled, who had come home exhausted every night and still made sure Evie had everything she needed. "I'd love to see what Clara's found. I'll introduce you. She's been dying to meet the woman Eleanor never stopped talking about." There was something in the way he said it, a warmth, a hint of something that went beyond professional obligation. Evie felt a flutter of awareness that she immediately pushed aside. She was still technically married, still in the middle of a crisis, still trying to figure out which way was up. Now was not the time for whatever this was becoming. "Conrad," she set down her coffee cup. "What's our next move, legally?" He accepted the change of subject without comment. The probate hearing is in 2 weeks. Harrison Blackwell will present his challenge, mental incompetence, undue influence, the usual ammunition. Will respond with Eleanor's physician reports, her video testimony, and evidence that she planned this bequest for over 18 months. And then? Then we wait for the judge's ruling. If it goes our way, which it should, the challenge gets dismissed and the inheritance is finalized. And if it doesn't go our way? Conrad's jaw tightened. It will. I've spent 15 years preparing for this possibility, even when Eleanor was still healthy. The case is airtight. But Blackwell has connections, the Mitchell family has favors to call in, and Charleston has a way of protecting its own, even when its own are clearly in the wrong. Evie nodded slowly. So we prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. That's the plan. Conrad stood, gathering his things. I have some depositions to prepare, but I'll be back tomorrow morning. We should go through Eleanor's journals together. There might be additional documentation we can use. I'll be here. He paused at the door, turning back to look at her. Evie, for what it's worth, you handled that situation in the lobby exactly right. You didn't lose your temper, you didn't back down, and you didn't let them see you sweat. I sweated, she admitted. You just didn't see it. That's the point, he smiled. Eleanor would have been proud. He left, and Evie sat alone in Eleanor's study, surrounded by memories and facing a future she had never imagined. Her phone buzzed, a text from Timothy. The staff is talking about what happened in the lobby. They're all on your side. Evie smiled for the first time all day. Whatever else happened, she wasn't alone in this fight. The rooftop garden had been Eleanor's favorite place in the entire hotel. Evie found herself there that evening, after the last meeting of the day, after the final report. From Timothy, after a dinner she barely touched. The sun was setting over Charleston, painting the sky in shades of coral and gold, and the jasmine was blooming in the planters along the balustrade. She sat on the bench where Eleanor used to sit, looking out over a city that had been her home for 50 years, a city where she had learned to walk and read and dream, a city where she had fallen in love, gotten married, built a career, a city that might not protect her when she needed protection most. Mrs. Mitchell? Evie turned. Conrad was standing by the garden entrance, silhouetted against the fading light. You're back. Left my briefcase in the study. He hesitated. I saw the elevator heading to the roof and thought I should check. Make sure you were okay. Evie searched for the right word. Processing. Conrad walked over to the bench and sat down beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. Do you want to be alone? No. The word came out before she could think about it. No, I don't think I do. They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun sink below the horizon. The city lights began to flicker on one by one, like stars being born. Can I tell you something? Evie asked. Anything. I spent 14 years trying to make myself fit into Jonathan's world, his family, his expectations, his vision of what a wife should be. She pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders. I was good at it. I learned which fork to use at which course, which charities were acceptable to support, which topics were appropriate for dinner conversation. I became fluent in a language I never wanted to learn. And now? Now I realize that no matter how fluent I became, I was never going to be native. She laughed softly, bitterly. They were always going to see me as an outsider, someone who learned the rules but didn't really understand them, someone who was there on sufferance, not by right. Conrad was quiet for a moment. Eleanor used to say something similar about herself. Eleanor? Evie turned to look at him. She was born into that world. She was, but she never fit into it either. Conrad's expression was distant, remembering. Her family wanted her to marry a certain kind of man, support certain kinds of causes, live a certain kind of life. Instead, she married a jazz musician who played at her hotel and spent her entire life doing things that weren't done. Evie's breath caught. She married a jazz musician? William Ashworth. That was his stage name anyway. His real name was William Jefferson. Conrad smiled. He grew up in the Low Country, worked at the hotel as a bellhop, taught himself piano in the service entrance during his breaks. Eleanor heard him playing one night and fell in love with the music before she fell in love with the man. I never knew. Evie's voice was barely above a whisper. She never told me. She didn't tell many people. The marriage was a scandal at the time. Her family nearly disowned her. But Eleanor said William was the only person who ever made her feel like herself, instead of a role she was playing. Something clicked into place in Evie's mind. Eleanor leaving her the hotel, Eleanor telling her she deserved to be loved by someone who saw her light. Eleanor understanding, in a way that Evie had never fully grasped, exactly what it meant to be trapped in a world that didn't quite fit. "My father was a jazz musician too," Evie said. "Did you know that?" Conrad nodded. "Eleanor told me. She said that's when she first knew. When she found out about your father, she knew you were meant to have this place. Because of the music? Because of what the music represented." Conrad turned to face her fully, his hazel eyes warm in the fading light. "Your father and William Jefferson played the same circuit. Same hotels, same clubs, same after-hours joints. They probably knew each other, even if they didn't realize it." Evie felt tears sliding down her cheeks, and for once she didn't try to stop them. "She never told me any of this." "She was waiting for the right moment." Conrad's voice was gentle. "I think she was planning to tell you herself, before she ran out of time." Evie covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. All those years, all those conversations in Eleanor's study, all those cups of tea, all those moments of connection. And there had been an even deeper bond underneath, one she had never suspected. She felt Conrad move closer, felt his hand settle on her shoulder, warm and steady. "It's okay," he said softly. "It's okay to grieve. It's okay to be overwhelmed. You've been carrying so much for so long. I don't know how to do this." Evie's voice was muffled by her hands. "I don't know how to fight them and run this hotel and figure out who I even am without—" "You don't have to figure it out all at once." Conrad's hand moved from her shoulder to her back, tracing small, soothing circles. "And you don't have to figure it out alone." Evie lowered her hands and looked at him. In the last light of sunset, his face was soft, open, more vulnerable than she had seen it before. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Why do you care so much about what happens to me?" Conrad was quiet for a long moment. "Because Eleanor asked me to." "That's not the only reason." His eyes met hers. "No, it's not." The air between them shifted, became charged with something Evie didn't have a name for, something that felt dangerous and inevitable all at once. "Conrad, I know." He took a breath and moved back slightly, putting distance between them. "I know. It's not the right time. You're still married, still in the middle of a legal battle, still processing more than anyone should have to process at once. But I want you to know that when this is over, when you've won, when you're free, I'm not going anywhere." He stood, offering her his hand. "You're not alone in this, Evie. Whatever else happens, you're not alone." She took his hand. Let him help her to her feet. And for a moment, standing in Eleanor's garden with the stars coming out overhead, she let herself believe that everything might actually be okay. The next week passed in a blur of legal preparation and corporate management. Evie threw herself into work, partly because the hotel needed her attention, and partly because staying busy kept her from thinking too much about everything else. The probate hearing was approaching fast, and there was evidence to gather, testimony to prepare, strategies to finalize. Conrad was there every day, professional and focused during their work sessions, warmer when they found themselves alone. They developed a rhythm: coffee in the morning, lunch in the study, evening walks through the garden when the work was done. Evie told herself it was just two colleagues becoming friends. She almost believed it. Timothy brought her the financial evidence she needed on the 5th day. "It's bad," he said, spreading printouts across her desk. "Worse than we thought." Evie looked at the numbers. Jonathan had been siphoning money for at least 3 years, using a web of shell accounts and fake vendors that Timothy had spent days untangling. The total was staggering. Over $400,000 stolen directly from their joint accounts, plus another $300,000 in questionable consulting fees paid to companies that appeared to exist only on paper. "Can we prove he knew about this?" Conrad asked, examining the documents. "Most of it, yes." Timothy pointed to a series of emails he had flagged. He was smart enough not to put anything incriminating in writing, but he slipped up a few times. These messages reference the usual arrangement and our standard disbursement schedule. Combined with the bank records, it paints a pretty clear picture. And the gambling debts? That's where it gets interesting. Timothy pulled up another set of records. He owes money to some very serious people. The kind of people who don't file lawsuits when you don't pay. They just make sure you regret it. Evie's stomach turned. How much? Close to $1 million. Maybe more. Timothy's expression was grim. I have contacts in certain circles. The word is that Jonathan Mitchell has about 3 months before things get uncomfortable. That explains the desperation, Conrad said. He needs this inheritance to survive, not just to maintain his lifestyle, but literally to survive. Evie closed her eyes, processing this new information. Her husband was a thief and a gambler, drowning in debt to people who might actually hurt him if he couldn't pay. Part of her, a small, distant part, felt something like pity. He had built his own prison, bar by bar, and now he was trapped inside it. But most of her just felt exhausted. What do we do with this? She asked. We use it, Conrad said. Not to hurt him, but to protect you. If Jonathan understands that we know everything, every stolen dollar, every debt, every secret he's been hiding, he might realize that fighting this inheritance isn't worth the risk. You want to blackmail him? I want to give him the opportunity to walk away quietly. Conrad's voice was measured. If he drops the challenge and agrees to an uncontested divorce, we don't go to the authorities with what we've found. He can deal with his own problems without adding criminal charges to the pile. It was pragmatic. Cold, maybe, but pragmatic. And Evie was tired of being kind to people who hadn't been kind to her. Make the offer, she said, but make sure he understands it's a one-time thing. If he refuses, everything goes to the prosecutor. Conrad nodded. I'll arrange a meeting. After he and Timothy left, Evie sat alone in the study, staring at the evidence of her husband's betrayal. 14 years. She had given him 14 years of her life, her love, her loyalty, and this was what she had gotten in return. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. You're making a mistake. Drop the challenge, or you'll regret it. Evie stared at the message for a long moment. Then she screenshot it, forwarded it to Conrad, and deleted the original. Let them threaten. Let them scheme. Let them throw everything they had at her. She was done backing down. The storm came on the night before the probate hearing. Evie was in the hotel ballroom, supervising the preparations for a charity gala scheduled for the following weekend, when the first crack of thunder shook the windows. Within minutes, the sky had opened up, rain lashing against the historic glass in sheets. We should get these tables covered, Timothy said, already directing staff to protect the equipment. This wind isn't playing around. Evie nodded, but her attention was elsewhere. Through the rain-streaked windows, she could see lightning illuminating the city, each flash frozen like a photograph of chaos. The power flickered, went out, came back on again. Generators holding, Timothy reported, but we might want to send the staff home before this gets worse. Do it. Evie pulled out her phone to check the weather radar. I'll stay until the worst passes. Ma'am, you shouldn't be here alone. I won't be alone. Evie didn't look up from her phone. Mr. Reeves is meeting me here to go over tomorrow's testimony one more time. Timothy's expression shifted, something knowing flickering across his features, but he didn't comment. I'll make sure the security team knows he's expected. After Timothy left, Evie found herself alone in the vast ballroom, surrounded by half-set tables and the roar of the storm outside. The crystal chandeliers swayed slightly with each gust of wind, their prisms catching the emergency lights and scattering fragments of rainbow across the walls. She walked to the center of the room, her heels silent on the polished hardwood, and stopped beneath the largest chandelier. This was where Eleanor had married William Jefferson 62 years ago, where Evie's parents had danced at their own wedding reception, where history had been made and remade, generation after generation. Tomorrow, more history would be made, one way or another. You're standing in my aunt's favorite spot. Evie turned. Conrad was standing in the doorway, rain-dampened and slightly out of breath. The service entrance was flooded, he explained, walking toward her. Had to come in through the main lobby. How did you know this was her favorite spot? She told me. Conrad stopped beside her, looking up at the chandelier. She said this was where she first saw William play. He was performing at a debutante ball, and she was supposed to be mingling with appropriate young men. Instead, she spent the whole evening in this exact spot, watching a man play piano like his life depended on it. Evie smiled. And she fell in love. And she fell in love. Conrad turned to face her. Evie. The power went out again. This time, it stayed out. In the darkness, Evie could hear the storm raging outside, could feel the electricity in the air that had nothing to do with the weather. Conrad was close. She couldn't see him, but she could sense him, could hear his breathing. The generator should kick in soon, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I know. Neither of them moved. Conrad. Her voice cracked. I'm scared about tomorrow. I know that too. Not about losing. I'm scared about winning. She took a breath. If I win, then everything changes. My marriage is really over. Eleanor's really gone, and I have to figure out who I am without the fight to distract me. Would that be so terrible? I don't know. I've been fighting for so long. I don't know what I look like without the armor. The generator hummed to life. Emergency lights flickered on, bathing the ballroom in a soft, warm glow that was nothing like the harsh fluorescence they replaced. Conrad was closer than she realized, close enough that she could see the raindrops still clinging to his hair, the emotion in his hazel eyes, the way his chest rose and fell with each breath. I've seen you without the armor, he said quietly. In the garden, when you were crying. In the study, when you talk about Eleanor. In every moment when you let yourself be vulnerable instead of strong. And you're magnificent. He raised his hand, brushed a strand of hair from her face. His fingers lingered at her temple, tracing the curve of her cheekbone. You're the most remarkable woman I've ever met, with the armor or without it. Conrad, I know the timing is wrong. I know you're still technically married, still dealing with more than anyone should have to deal with. His thumb traced her jawline, leaving a trail of fire in its wake. But I need you to know that when this is over, when you've won, when you're free, I want to be part of whatever comes next. What if I lose? Then I want to be part of that too. Evie's breath caught in her throat. She had spent 14 years with a man who saw her as an accessory, a stepping stone, a means to an end. And here was Conrad Reeves, looking at her like she was the beginning and the end of everything. I'm going to kiss you now, she whispered, and I need you to tell me if that's a mistake. It's not a mistake. She closed the distance between them. The first kiss was soft, tentative, a question more than an answer. But when Conrad's hand moved to the back of her neck, when he pulled her closer and kissed her with everything he had, the question became irrelevant. This was not a mistake. This was an arrival. They stood in the center of the ballroom, wrapped around each other while the storm raged outside, and Evie felt something shift in her chest. The armor she had been wearing for so long, the defenses she had built to protect herself from a husband who didn't love her, from a world that didn't want her, began to crack. Not all at once, not completely, but enough to let something new begin to grow in the spaces between. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Conrad pressed his forehead to hers. Tomorrow, he said. We're going to win tomorrow. How do you know? Because Eleanor planned it that way. He kissed her again, softer this time. And because I won't let you lose. Outside, the storm began to ease. The rain softened from a roar to a whisper. The lightning moved away toward the sea. And inside the ballroom, where Eleanor had fallen in love 62 years ago, her chosen daughter began to do the same. The probate hearing is close, and everything Evie has been fighting for hangs in the balance. If you want to see her face down Jonathan and Constance and find out what happens next between Evie and Conrad, make sure you're subscribed with that notification bell on. Drop a comment and tell me, do you believe in second chances at love? Chapter 3. The Charleston County Probate Court was housed in a building that looked like it had been standing since the Revolutionary War. Evie climbed the stone steps at 8:47 a.m., 13 minutes before the hearing was scheduled to begin. Conrad walked beside her, his briefcase in one hand, his other hand resting lightly at the small of her back, a gesture of support that felt both professional and personal. She had barely slept. After the kiss in the ballroom, after the storm, after everything, she had gone back to the guest room at the Mitchell house and lain awake until dawn, replaying every moment, every touch, every word. Part of her had wanted to call Conrad back, to spend the night in his arms instead of alone with her thoughts. But she needed to face this morning with a clear head, and that wouldn't have been possible if she'd stayed with him. There would be time for that later. If they won. When they won. The courtroom was smaller than Evie expected, not the grand chamber she had imagined, but a wood-paneled room with uncomfortable chairs and fluorescent lights that hummed slightly. Jonathan and Constance were already there, seated at the opposing table with Harrison Blackwell between them. Jonathan looked terrible. The dark circles under his eyes had deepened, and he seemed to have lost weight in just the past week. When Evie walked in, he looked up at her with an expression that might have been guilt or might have been hatred. She couldn't tell anymore. Constance, by contrast, looked immaculate. Her vintage Chanel suit was pressed to perfection, her white hair swept back in an elegant chignon, her posture straight as a blade. She watched Evie approach with those cold blue eyes and didn't blink. All rise. Judge Patricia Wentworth entered the courtroom with the measured pace of a woman who had been dispensing justice for 30 years and didn't intend to rush it now. She was elegant in her robes, her silver hair cropped short, her dark face revealing nothing of her thoughts. Be seated. The judge settled into her chair and opened the file in front of her. We're here today to consider a challenge to the will of Eleanor Margaret Ashworth, deceased. The challenge has been filed by Jonathan Mitchell III, represented by Harrison Blackwell. The respondent is Evangeline Price Mitchell, represented by Conrad Reeves. She looked up, her gaze sweeping over both tables. I've reviewed the initial filings. Mr. Blackwell, you claim that Mrs. Ashworth was mentally incompetent at the time she executed her will, and that the bequest to Mrs. Price Mitchell was the result of undue influence. These are serious allegations. I expect you to support them with evidence, not speculation. Of course, Your Honor. Blackwell rose with practiced ease. We intend to demonstrate that Eleanor Ashworth's decision to leave a $500 million property to her hotel manager, bypassing family members, charitable organizations, and any number of more appropriate beneficiaries, was the result of manipulation by a woman who spent 25 years positioning herself to receive exactly this windfall. Evie's hands clenched in her lap. Conrad placed his hand over hers, a silent reminder to stay calm. Let's start with your evidence of mental incompetence, Judge Wentworth said. What do you have? Blackwell presented his case with the smooth confidence of a man who had done this 1,000 times before. He called witnesses who testified that Eleanor had become forgetful in her final years, that she had sometimes confused names or dates, that she had once gotten lost on her way home from the grocery store. Conrad cross-examined each witness methodically, establishing that normal memory lapses were not the same as mental incompetence, that Eleanor had continued to manage her business affairs until weeks before her death, that she had passed 3 independent medical evaluations confirming her soundness of mind. Then, Blackwell moved on to undue influence. The relationship between Eleanor Ashworth and Evangeline Mitchell was unusually close, he said, addressing the judge. More like mother and daughter than employer and employee. We contend that Mrs. Mitchell exploited this closeness to manipulate an elderly woman into disinheriting her proper beneficiaries. Define proper beneficiaries, Mr. Blackwell, Judge Wentworth said dryly. Mrs. Ashworth had no surviving children, no surviving spouse, and no close relatives who maintained a relationship with her. But she had community connections, charitable obligations, a legacy to consider. Blackwell spread his hands. Instead, she left everything to a woman who stood to benefit professionally and personally from her largesse. Your Honor, Conrad stood. We'd like to present video evidence recorded by Eleanor Ashworth herself 6 months before her death, specifically addressing the allegations now being made. Judge Wentworth nodded. Proceed. The courtroom's ancient AV system wheezed to life, and Eleanor's face appeared on the small screen set up beside the judge's bench. She looked tired in the video, thin and pale, clearly already fighting the illness that would claim her, but her eyes were sharp and clear, her voice steady. My name is Eleanor Margaret Ashworth, she said. I'm recording this video on April 15th, 2024, in the presence of my attorney, Preston Carmichael, and 2 independent witnesses. I am doing this because I know that when I die, there will be people who question my decision to leave the Beaumont Grand Hotel to Evangeline Price Mitchell. She paused, gathering herself. To those people, I say this: I'm of sound mind. I've been examined by 3 physicians who will attest to that fact. I'm not being manipulated, coerced, or influenced by anyone. This decision is mine, and mine alone. Eleanor leaned forward, and even through the poor video quality, Evie could see the fierce love in her eyes. Evie is not my employee. She's my daughter, in every way that matters except blood. She came to my hotel when she was 17 years old, a girl with nothing but dreams and determination, and she worked her way up from the front desk to general manager through sheer brilliance and grit. She saved my hotel during the recession when everyone told me to sell. She held my hand when my husband died. She is the person I trust most in this world to carry forward the legacy I've spent my life building. Eleanor's voice cracked slightly. I am leaving her everything because she deserves everything, because she has earned it, because there is no one else on this earth I would trust with my family's history. She straightened in her chair. If anyone challenges this will, I want them to know. You are not fighting for what's right. You are fighting for what you think you're owed. And in this family, we do not inherit what we deserve. We earn it. The screen went dark. The courtroom was silent. Judge Wentworth removed her reading glasses and studied the opposing table. Mr. Blackwell, do you have anything that contradicts the testimony we just heard? Blackwell's face had gone slightly pale. Your Honor, a self-serving video recorded by the decedent is hardly. It's exactly the kind of evidence courts rely on in contested probate matters. Judge Wentworth's voice was crisp. Mrs. Ashworth clearly anticipated this challenge and prepared accordingly. I've seen her medical records which confirm her competence. I've heard your witnesses who testified to nothing more than normal age-related forgetfulness, and I've now watched a clear, lucid statement from the decedent herself explaining exactly why she made the choice she made. She turned to Conrad. Mr. Reeves, do you have anything to add? Conrad stood. Just one thing, Your Honor. We have evidence that the challenger in this case, Jonathan Mitchell, has been systematically stealing from the respondent for at least 3 years. We believe this challenge is not a good faith effort to honor Eleanor Ashworth's wishes, but a desperate attempt to access funds to cover Mr. Mitchell's substantial gambling debts. The courtroom exploded. Jonathan shot to his feet. That's a lie. Sit down, Mr. Mitchell. Judge Wentworth's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Mr. Blackwell, control your client. Blackwell grabbed Jonathan's arm and forced him back into his chair. Constance sat rigid beside them, her face drained of color. Your Honor, these allegations are completely unfounded, Blackwell began. Are they? Conrad produced a thick folder. We have bank records, email correspondence, and testimony from multiple witnesses documenting Mr. Mitchell's systematic theft and his current debt situation. If the court wishes, we can enter this evidence into the record. Judge Wentworth held out her hand. Give it here. She spent several minutes reviewing the documents, her expression growing more severe with each page she turned. Finally, she looked up. Mr. Mitchell, is any of this true? Jonathan's mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound came out. I'll take that as a yes. Judge Wentworth set down the folder. Mr. Blackwell, I'm going to make this very simple. Your challenge is denied. Eleanor Ashworth's will stands as written. The Beaumont Grand Hotel and all associated assets belong to Evangeline Price Mitchell, free and clear. Your Honor, I'm not finished. The judge's eyes were hard. Based on the evidence presented today, I'm also referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of potential criminal activity. Mr. Mitchell, I strongly suggest you retain a criminal defense attorney. Jonathan's face went gray. Constance Mitchell stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. For a moment, she looked like she was going to say something, some cutting remark, some final attack, but instead, she simply gathered her purse and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. Jonathan followed her, his head bowed, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a costume he had outgrown. Judge Wentworth struck her gavel once. This court is adjourned. Evie made it to the courthouse bathroom before she started crying. She locked herself in a stall and pressed her forehead against the cold metal door, her whole body shaking with relief and grief and exhaustion. It was over. After weeks of fear and preparation and sleepless nights, it was finally over. She had won. Eleanor's trust had been honored. The hotel was hers. The future was hers. And Jonathan, the man she had loved for 14 years, the man she had built a life with, the man she had trusted with her heart, was probably going to prison. "Evie," Conrad's voice came from outside the bathroom door. "Are you okay?" She laughed through her tears. "I'm in the women's restroom, Conrad." "I know. I don't care." A pause. "I'm coming in." "You can't." The door opened. He stepped inside, checked to make sure they were alone, and then crossed to her stall and simply waited. Evie unlocked the door. He caught her as she fell into his arms, holding her tight while she sobbed into his shoulder. He didn't say anything, didn't try to comfort her with words or platitudes or any of the things people say when they don't know what else to do. He just held her, his hand stroking her hair, his body solid and warm against hers. "I'm sorry," she gasped. "I don't know why I'm crying. We won. I should be celebrating." "You're crying because you're human." Conrad pulled back just enough to cup her face in his hands. "You're crying because the man you were married to for 14 years turned out to be someone you didn't know. Because Eleanor is really gone. Because everything you thought your life was going to be just ended. And even when that's a good thing, it still hurts." Evie stared at him through her tears. "How do you always know exactly what to say?" "I don't. I just know you." He wiped her cheeks with his thumbs. "I've spent weeks learning you, watching you, falling for you." "Falling for me? Did you think last night was just a moment of weakness?" He smiled, soft and sure. "Evie, I've been falling for you since the first time I saw you stand up to Harrison Blackwell in that lobby. Probably before that. Probably since Eleanor first showed me your picture and told me you were the strongest person she'd ever known. She showed you my picture. She showed everyone your picture. You were her greatest accomplishment." Conrad leaned his forehead against hers. "And now you're going to be your own." Evie closed her eyes, breathing him in. "What happens now?" "Now we go back to the hotel. You take a shower, eat something, maybe sleep for the first time in a week." His lips brushed against hers, feather light. "And then we figure out the rest together." "Together? If you'll have me." Evie opened her eyes and looked at him. This man who had appeared in her life at the exact moment she needed. Him who had fought beside her and believed in her and seen through every defense she had ever built. "I'll have you," she said. He kissed her then, properly, the way he hadn't let himself kiss her before the hearing was won, deep and thorough and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Evie laughed. "We're still in the courthouse bathroom. Best courthouse bathroom in Charleston?" Conrad grinned. "Come on, let's go home." Home. For the first time in 14 years, Evie knew exactly where that was. The night before Evie's divorce was finalized, she went to Conrad's suite. She didn't call ahead, didn't announce herself, just knocked on his door at 11 o'clock at night and waited. He opened the door in jeans and a white undershirt, his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, a book in his hand. The look on his face when he saw her, surprised and delighted and hungry all at once, made her breath catch in her throat. "Evie, what are you—" "I'm scared about tomorrow." He set down his book. "About the divorce. About what comes after." She stepped into the room without waiting to be invited. "About who I'm supposed to be when I'm not fighting anymore. About whether I remember how to be happy." Conrad closed the door behind her. "And you came here because when I imagined being happy." Evie turned to face him. "You're there. Every time. In every version of the future I can picture, you're there." His expression shifted, softened, became something raw and vulnerable that she had never seen on his face before. "Evie, I know the timing is still wrong. I know I'm not officially divorced until tomorrow. I know we should probably wait, be responsible, do things the right way." She took a breath. "But I'm tired of waiting. I'm tired of being responsible. And I'm tired of pretending that what I feel for you is anything less than what it is." "What is it?" "Everything." The word came out like a prayer. It's everything, Conrad. You're everything. He crossed the room in 3 strides and kissed her like a man who had been holding himself back for weeks and couldn't do it any longer. His hands cupped her face, then moved to her waist, pulling her against him. She melted into the kiss, into him, into the promise of everything they hadn't let themselves have until now. "Are you sure?" he asked against her lips. "Because once we do this, I'm not letting you go. You need to understand that." "I understand. And you're sure?" Evie pulled back just enough to look into his eyes. "I haven't been sure of anything in 14 years, but I'm sure of this." He smiled, slow and warm and full of everything he hadn't let himself say. "Then stay." She stayed. Later, much later, Evie lay in Conrad's arms, her head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. The hotel suite was dark except for the city lights filtering through the curtains, painting everything in shades of silver and gold. "Can I tell you something?" Conrad's voice was a rumble beneath her ear. "Anything?" "Eleanor made me promise to take care of you." His hand traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "When she first told me about the will, about what she was planning to leave you, she made me swear that I would watch over you no matter what happened." Evie lifted her head. "That's why you came back to Charleston?" "That's why I came back." He met her eyes. "But it's not why I stayed, and it's not why I'm here right now." "Why are you here right now?" "Because somewhere between the lobby confrontation and the rooftop garden and that first kiss in the ballroom, I stopped doing this for Eleanor." His thumb traced her jawline. "I started doing it for me, because I wanted to. Because you're the most extraordinary woman I've ever known, and I couldn't imagine walking away from you." Evie felt tears prick at her eyes, happy tears for once. "Eleanor would have loved this." "She would have," Conrad smiled. "She told me once that the best gift she ever gave herself was letting herself love William, even when everyone told her it was wrong. She said that love doesn't come when it's convenient. It comes when it comes, and you either grab hold of it or you spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been." She was very wise. She was, and she saw this coming. He pressed a kiss to Evie's forehead. "In her last letter to me, the one she left with Preston, she wrote, 'Take care of Evie, and if you're smart, let her take care of you too.'" Evie laughed through her tears. She was matchmaking from beyond the grave. She was ensuring her daughter's happiness, the only way she knew how. They lay in silence for a while, wrapped around each other, the city humming quietly beyond the windows. "I should tell you something," Evie said finally. "What?" "I can't remember the last time someone made me feel like this, like I'm worth fighting for, like I'm enough, exactly as I am." She traced his collarbone with her fingertip. "I spent so long trying to be what Jonathan wanted, what Constance wanted, what everyone expected. I forgot what it felt like to just be myself. And now? Now I want to find out who that is, the real me, the one I buried under 14 years of trying to fit into someone else's story." She looked up at him. "Will you help me?" "I'll do better than that." Conrad pulled her closer. "I'll stand next to you while you discover her yourself, and I'll love whoever she turns out to be." Evie kissed him, soft and sweet and full of promise. That's more than enough. Evie's divorce becomes final. Her old life ends, and her new one begins. If you want to see what happens next, and if you're rooting for Evie and Conrad as much as I am, make sure you're subscribed with that notification bell on. Drop a comment and tell me, what do you think the future holds for these two? Chapter 4. The divorce was final at 2:17 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon. Evie signed the papers in mind and her attorney's office, a different attorney than Conrad to avoid any appearance of conflict, and walked out of the building a free woman. Jonathan hadn't contested anything. Faced with the evidence of his financial crimes and the very real possibility of prison time, he had agreed to every term she demanded. Full dissolution of assets, no claim on her inheritance, and a clean break with no alimony in either direction. He was facing federal charges now. Something about wire fraud and money laundering, the details of which Evie had deliberately avoided learning. She didn't want to feel sorry for him, didn't want to feel anything for him at all. Conrad was waiting outside the attorney's office, leaning against his car with his hands in his pockets and the afternoon sun catching the silver in his hair. "It's done?" he asked. "It's done." He opened the car door for her. "Where do you want to go?" "The hotel." Evie slid into the passenger seat. "I want to see it, really see it for the first time, as mine." They drove through Charleston's historic streets, past the antebellum houses in the Spanish moss and the tourists with their cameras and their sweet tea. The city looked different to Evie now, brighter somehow, fuller of possibility, like she was seeing it for the first time instead of the thousandth. The Beaumont Grand rose against the sky as they approached, its white columns gleaming in the afternoon light. Evie had seen this building every day for 30 years, but today it took her breath away. Her hotel, her legacy, her future. Conrad parked in the underground garage and walked with her to the lobby, his hand warm in hers. The staff nodded as they passed, Rosa from housekeeping, Marcus from the kitchen, Jalen working the afternoon shift. They all knew, the whole city knew, and they were all, in their own ways, celebrating. Timothy met them at the elevator. "Miss Delphine is upstairs. She insisted on waiting for you." Evie smiled. Her godmother had been a rock throughout all of this, sharp-tongued and fiercely protective, showing up with home-cooked meals and unsolicited advice and exactly the kind of love Evie had needed. "Tell her we'll be right there." They took the elevator to the rooftop garden, emerging into the late afternoon sunshine. Miss Delphine was there, as Timothy had promised, sitting on Eleanor's bench with a basket of food on her lap. "About time you showed up." Miss Delphine stood, her silver hair catching the light. At 72, she was still formidable, tall and elegant and possessed of a stare that could make grown men reconsider their life choices. "I've been waiting here for an hour. I was getting divorced. It took a while." "Humph." Miss Delphine looked Evie up and down, then shifted her gaze to Conrad. "And this is the man Eleanor picked out for you?" "He's the man I picked out for myself." Evie squeezed Conrad's hand. "Eleanor just made sure we met." "Smart woman, Eleanor." Miss Delphine's expression softened. "She always did know what you needed before you did." Evie crossed the garden and embraced her godmother, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender and cooking spices that had meant comfort for as long as she could remember. "I miss her," Evie whispered. "I know, baby." Miss Delphine patted her back. "We all do. But she's not really gone. Not while you're here, carrying forward everything she built." They sat together on the bench, Evie, Conrad, and Miss Delphine, and watched the sun sink toward the horizon. Miss Delphine unpacked her basket, fried chicken, biscuits, coleslaw, and a thermos of sweet tea, and they ate together while the city lights flickered on below them. "Your mama would be so proud of you," Miss Delphine said, passing Evie a drumstick. "She always knew you were destined for something special." "She wanted me to be happy." Evie's voice was soft. That's all she ever talked about. Not success, not money, just happiness. "Well," Miss Delphine glanced meaningfully at Conrad, "are you happy?" Evie looked at the man beside her, the man who had fought for her, believed in her, stood beside her through every storm. The man Eleanor had somehow known she would need, long before Evie knew it herself. "Getting there," she said. Conrad took her hand. 6 months later, the Beaumont Grand unveiled its newest edition, the Eleanor Ashworth Hospitality Scholarship, funded by a permanent endowment from the hotel's profits. The first recipient was a young woman named Jasmine Williams, 19 years old, raised by a single mother who worked in the hotel's laundry department, brilliant and determined and hungry for the chance that Evie herself had received all those years ago. The ceremony took place in the ballroom, beneath the same chandelier where Eleanor had fallen in love, where Evie and Conrad had shared their first kiss. The hotel staff gathered in their Sunday best, along with industry leaders, community members, and journalists who wanted to document this new chapter in Charleston history. Evie stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd. Conrad sat in the front row beside Clara, who had flown in from a museum conference to celebrate. Miss Delphine occupied the seat of honor, wearing a spectacular hat that probably violated several fashion laws, but suited her perfectly. 30 years ago, Evie began, I walked into this hotel as a teenager with nothing but determination and a mother who believed in me. Eleanor Ashworth took a chance on me. She saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself, and she spent the next 25 years nurturing it, challenging it, helping it grow. She paused, gathering herself. Eleanor didn't just leave me a hotel. She left me a responsibility, a legacy, a challenge to do for others what she did for me. Evie's eyes found Jasmine in the crowd, young, nervous, wearing a dress that was probably borrowed. Today, we begin fulfilling that responsibility. The applause was thunderous. After the ceremony, after the photographs and the interviews and the champagne toasts, Evie found a quiet moment alone in Eleanor's study. She sat in her usual chair, her chair now, and looked at the photograph on the desk. Eleanor and William, on their wedding day. Two people who had defied every expectation, broken every rule, and built something beautiful out of love and determination. "I hope I'm making you proud," Evie whispered. The door opened. Conrad slipped inside, 2 glasses of champagne in his hands. "Hiding already?" "Just remembering." Evie accepted the glass he offered. "Saying thank you, I guess." Conrad sat on the arm of her chair, his thigh warm against her shoulder. "She knows." "You think so?" "I know so." He kissed the top of her head. "You're everything she hoped you would be, everything she knew you could be." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the city lights through the window. Conrad. Ask me." He went very still. "Ask you what?" "The question you've been carrying around for 2 months, the one that makes that little box-shaped lump appear in your pocket whenever you think I'm not looking." Conrad laughed, surprised and delighted and utterly caught out. "You weren't supposed to notice that. I notice everything about you." Evie turned to look at him. "So ask me." He set down his champagne glass, reached into his pocket, and pulled out a small velvet box that he had apparently been carrying around for weeks, waiting for the right moment. Evangeline Price. He opened the box, revealing a simple, elegant ring, a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds, almost identical to Eleanor's ring. "Will you marry me?" Evie stared at the ring, at the man holding it, at the life she had never dared to imagine, suddenly spread out before her like a road made of gold. "Yes," she said. Conrad slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "Eleanor helped me choose it," he admitted, "before she died. She made me promise that when the time was right, when you were ready, I would give you something that matched the ring she left you." Tears slid down Evie's cheeks. She planned this, all of it. "She wanted you to be loved." Conrad wiped her tears with his thumb. "She wanted you to have everything she found with William, and she trusted me to give it to you. Do you always do what Eleanor asks? When she's right?" Conrad smiled. "Always." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, while the city sparkled beyond the window and Eleanor's photograph watched from the desk, a smile frozen in time. The wedding took place on a Saturday in April, exactly 1 year after Eleanor's death. They held it in the rooftop garden, of course. Evie couldn't imagine getting married anywhere else. The jasmine was in bloom, filling the air with sweetness, and the late afternoon sun painted everything in shades of gold. Miss Delphine walked Evie down the aisle, wearing another spectacular hat and crying unashamedly. Behind her sunglasses, Clara stood as Conrad's best person, elegant in a tailored suit that matched her father's. Timothy and the hotel staff filled the rows of chairs, along with industry colleagues, community leaders, and the first cohort of Eleanor Ashworth scholars. The officiant was Judge Patricia Wentworth, who had agreed to perform the ceremony as a personal favor. She stood beneath an arch of white roses and looked out at the gathered crowd with the same measured authority she brought to her courtroom. "We are gathered here," she began, "to witness the union of two people who found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, who were brought together by grief and loss and the extraordinary vision of a woman who understood that love doesn't always arrive when it's convenient, but it always arrives when it's meant to." Evie held Conrad's hands, looking into the eyes of the man who had become her partner, her advocate, her home. "Do you, Conrad Reeves, take Evangeline Price to be your lawfully wedded wife, to love, honor, and cherish in good times and in challenging times for as long as you both shall live?" "I do." Conrad's voice was steady. "Sure." I have since the moment I met her. I will until my last breath. And do you, Evangeline Price, take Conrad Reeves to be your lawfully wedded husband, to love, honor, and cherish in good times and in challenging times for as long as you both shall live? Evie thought about everything that had led her to this moment, the years of fighting, the betrayals, the grief, the unexpected joy of finding love when she had stopped looking for it. I do, she said, with everything I am and everything I will become. Then by the power vested in me by the state of South Carolina, I pronounce you husband and wife. Judge Wentworth smiled, a rare sight in any context. You may kiss your bride. Conrad cupped Evie's face in his hands and kissed her the way he had kissed her that first night in the ballroom, deep and thorough and full of promise. The crowd erupted in applause. Miss Delphine's sobs were audible 3 rows back. And somewhere, Evie was certain, Eleanor Ashworth was watching, smiling, knowing that her work was finally complete. The reception was held in the ballroom, beneath the chandelier that had witnessed so much history. Evie and Conrad danced their first dance to At Last by Etta James, a song that William Jefferson used to play at the hotel, according to the stories Eleanor had told. The lyrics seemed to echo everything Evie felt, the sense of finally arriving, finally being home, finally finding the love she had waited her whole life to receive. Clara gave a toast that made everyone cry. Timothy gave a toast that made everyone laugh. Miss Delphine gave a toast that somehow managed to do both, while also including a pointed warning to Conrad about what would happen if he ever hurt her goddaughter. As the evening wound down and the guests began to drift away, Evie found herself standing by the window, looking out at the city she had loved her entire life. Charleston sparkled beneath her, beautiful and complicated, and full of stories she was only beginning to understand. Conrad appeared beside her, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. This is becoming a habit, she said. Good habits are worth keeping. He handed her a glass. What are you thinking about? Everything. Evie leaned against his shoulder. Nothing. The future. What does it look like? The future. Evie considered the question. She thought about the hotel stretching out below them, her hotel, her legacy, her responsibility. She thought about the scholarship program and the young people it would help, generation after generation. She thought about Conrad beside her, solid and steady and committed to building something together. It looks like this, she said finally. Like standing in a place that feels like home with someone who feels like forever. Like having work that matters and love that lasts. Like finally becoming the person I was always meant to be. That sounds pretty good. It sounds perfect. Evie turned to face him, her husband, her partner, her future. Eleanor was right, you know. She told me in her letter that love doesn't come when it's convenient. It comes when it comes, and you either grab hold of it or spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been. And you grabbed hold? With both hands. She kissed him, soft and sweet and full of all the promise their future held. And I'm never letting go. 3 years later, the Beaumont Grand Hotel was named one of the top 10 historic properties in America. Evie accepted the award at a ceremony in Washington, D.C., with Conrad at her side and a speech that honored Eleanor's legacy while looking forward to the future. The Eleanor Ashworth Scholarship Program had grown to fund 20 students annually, with a waiting list that stretched 3 years into the future. Miss Delphine passed away peacefully in her sleep the following spring, surrounded by family and wearing yet another spectacular hat. Her funeral was held in the hotel's garden, and her portrait was hung in the lobby beside Eleanor's, 2 women who had shaped the Beaumont Grand with their love and dedication and fierce protection of the people they considered family. Clara married a professor from the College of Charleston and had twins, a boy and a girl named William and Eleanor, after the great-grandparents they would never meet, but would always know through stories. Timothy was promoted to chief operating officer, and eventually became Evie's partner in the business, helping to guide the hotel into its next century of operation. He brought on his own protege, a young woman from the scholarship program who reminded him of Evie at that age, and the cycle continued. And through it all, Evie and Conrad built their life together. They traveled when they could, loved fiercely when they couldn't, and never forgot. The woman who had brought them together with nothing but faith and vision and an unshakable belief that some things were simply meant to be. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, they stood together on the rooftop garden as the sun set over Charleston. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened," Conrad asked, "if Eleanor hadn't left you the hotel? If Jonathan hadn't shown his true colors? If we had never met?" "Sometimes." Evie leaned into his embrace. "But then I remember what Eleanor taught me. You can't live in what might have been. You can only live in what is." "And what is this?" Evie looked at the city spreading out below them, the hotel that had been her home for 30 years, the legacy she was building for generations to come, the man beside her who had become her everything. "This is everything," she said. "This is exactly where I'm supposed to be." Conrad kissed her forehead. "Eleanor was right about you." "What did she say?" "That you were the strongest person she'd ever known." He pulled her closer. "That you would change the world one life at a time. That you would find your way home, even when you didn't know you were lost." Evie closed her eyes, breathing in the jasmine, feeling the warmth of Conrad's arms around her, listening to the heartbeat of the city she loved. Eleanor had been right about everything. And now, finally, Evie understood why. Some love stories take longer to begin. But when they do, when two people find each other against all odds, when trust is built from the ashes of betrayal, when love arrives, not when it's convenient, but when it's meant to, those stories last forever. This was Evie's story. This was her home. And this was just the beginning.